we are here to celebrate the life and work of architect Judah Shumiatcher. 4 years ago, shortly after my arrival in Vancouver, I attended the celebration of the long overdue completion of Cornelia Oberlander's landscape at the Museum of Anthropology. I'm sure some of you were there in attendance as well. And it was there that I first met Judah and Barbara Shumiatcher. We became fast friends, and I subsequently had the honor of spending many an afternoon and evening bathed in their legendary hospitality in their beautiful home. Just as I was getting accustomed to stopping by for tea on the terrace, it was determined that the house would be sold, and given Vancouver's high land values, it was likely, we knew, to be demolished. It seemed to me that such a unique piece of architecture, one that had given so many people so much pleasure for so many years, could not be allowed to just evaporate. So with the help from several key collaborators, including Barbara and Judah and their family, we set out to document the story of the house before it was too late. And before Judah and I begin our conversation, we would like to offer our thanks to those who made this evening and the project possible. First, to Nancy and Niels for their generosity in hosting us here tonight, and to Michael and Thomas and the rest of the Inform staff for setting us up so well. Thank you very, very much. They've been extremely generous in hosting book launches for us here, and it's a beautiful space. We're always grateful to gather here in this place. To the SALA, thank you. To the SALA students, Tyler Brown and Justin Neenan, thank you for the fine drawings you did for the book, working closely with Judah to make sure they were accurate. And to architectural photographer Michael Perlmutter, who's in the back, thank you for creating such exquisite photographs of the house. Your skillful photographs capture the warmth of the house magnificently. And And finally, to graphic designer Pablo Mandel, thank you for your bottomless patience and for your making the rest of us look good with your elegant book design. Thank you very much, Pablo. So it must be noted that Michael and Pablo, together with his family, have traveled great distance to be with us tonight from Sweden and Stockholm and Buenos Aires, respectively. They're here to pay a tribute to Judah and to continue their work on our Modern House series. But more about the series at the end of the program. And now, to the subject of the book. Judah.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Well, so you want to know what hat making has to do with architecture?
Yes, Judah is the son of a well-known hat maker, and for many years he worked in and later managed the family hat factory in Calgary. And I can imagine that's very good training for an architect, but I want to know about that.
Well, you see, there's not much, but there is certain things. You know, a hat frames the face, so hat making teaches framing. Just like a window frames the view, you have to know where to put it and how it should be focused. So that is, just like in a Japanese tea house, it's very, very important just where the windows are placed so that you can see a certain display that they want you to look at.
You told me a bit about many of the hats that you produced in the factory were custom fitted. And people would come in and it was just tweaking the brim just a little this way or that way, what a difference that could make. So the attention to detail is so important, huh?
Yeah, you know, because hats, although they're basically oval shaped, the head, when we had a machine that took the pattern of the head and you'd be surprised what they look like. There's so many bumps around. It's not even at all. So any person that had tried a hat on, and they had a bumpy head. The brim went all out of shape, and so we knew how to fix that. Yeah, so that's why they came.
I can only imagine that's fantastic training for an architect as starting out. So when you were an undergraduate, you studied first electrical engineering, and then later you changed schools and you changed to mechanical engineering and
Yes.
completed your degree at McGill. Can you talk a little bit about how you applied your education in time and motion studies to the hat factory when you returned home to Calgary?
Yeah, well, that's a more direct relationship, of course, because time and motion is the essence of a good factory layout and a good factory management. So it has to be studied in detail about the movements so that it will be easy for the workers to move, and it'll take less time. So that was that.
Okay. So you returned, we'll give a little biographical sketch here. So after returning to Calgary, after your education, your first education in
Yes.
engineering, you got married to Barbara, and you set out on a 6-month honeymoon to Europe, but you stopped along the way in New York, and there you had, as you told me, a very, very important encounter with Frank Lloyd Wright. Can you talk about how that meeting came about and how that impacted your life?
Yeah, there was a television program called Omnibus, which some of you might remember, and Alistair Cook as the interviewer, and he was interviewing Frank Lloyd Wright at the time. Frank Lloyd Wright had the commission for the new Guggenheim building, but the building wasn't started yet, and Frank Lloyd Wright had a display there of all his models and drawings and so on. So he was being interviewed.
And you were watching him on TV, and you got the idea to call him.
Yeah,
I think.
we were out for dinner at a cousin's place, and it certainly, there was no television yet in Calgary, so we turned on the television to see what was on, and there was Frank Lloyd Wright being interviewed on Omnibus. It was an hour-long program, and it was really an amazing thing to see. All the, Calgary was going through a big building boom at the moment, and all kinds of things were being built. So it certainly was familiar with construction, but I was not familiar with anything that looked like that in Calgary. They certainly didn't have any shapes of houses or buildings that remind me of anything that Frank Lloyd Wright was showing us.
As you told me, you had not thought about building as architecture.
Sorry?
You told me that you had not thought about building as architecture until this encounter with Frank Lloyd Wright.
Well, yes, because I had never even met an architect, and I wasn't familiar with that sort of thing at all. And when I saw Frank Lloyd Wright's work, I was truly bowled over.
So the next part of the story is a heads up to the students who are here. Pay attention, because this is what can really happen with a little courage. So you picked up the telephone.
Yeah.
After seeing him on TV.
Yeah, because I was talking so effusively about it to our group. Cousin Arthur then said, "Well, why don't you give him a call? He's staying at the plaza." So I was really taken a bit aback about that, but I decided, look, I haven't got anything to lose, and Frank Lloyd Wright was not that popular in those days, and so I decided to do that. We picked up the telephone, and I called the plaza. I imagined that I'd have to get through some screening before I spoke to him. But no, he picked up the telephone himself and he said, "Hello, this is Frank Lloyd Wright." Anyway, I like that.
It happens like that.
So I told him quickly why I was calling and that I really had some questions. And is it possible that we could meet somewhere and talk? He said, "Yes, you come tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock at the exhibition place, and we'll take a little stroll and talk about what's there." I was really gratified, but it really shows you that a direct approach can sometimes be very, very successful. So at 10 o'clock the next morning, I was already there, and it was windy outside, and he wears a cape, and he came flying through the doors, and that's what it looked like. The cape was billowing out behind him. He was a very dramatic person. He always wanted to be impressive in that way. So we met, and then we took a little stroll, about a 15 or 20-minute stroll at the most, going around the building, talking a very personal kind of chat. And we certainly weren't talking about architecture. I couldn't talk to Frank Lloyd Wright about architecture, but I told him my impression. I wanted to know more about his school and many other things. And so that took a time, all up, and we strolled around. We had a good time. It was very, very nice to have a talk with him. He was very approachable, very friendly, and at the end of it, he invited me to come to his school to learn about architecture, to go to Taliesin. Well, I was really floored. I wasn't really ready for this, So anyway, I found myself at a crossroads. Do I change my plans about going to Europe and then go to Taliesin instead? And so
I think you decided to go off to Europe, but with your eyes wide open, right? But looking
sorry.
with your eyes wide open in Europe, looking at cities now with a new eye.
Yeah,
And
that was certainly true.
so you returned to Calgary from your honeymoon, and your father and friends gave you the opportunity and his friends gave you the opportunity to design and build several houses back in Calgary.
Yes.
And as you designed these houses, you were studying the work of Frank Lloyd Wright, still quite fascinated from that encounter, and you became interested in his use of grids for the floor plans of his houses that were other than 90-degree grids. Can you speak about your fascination for various grids as plan generators?
Yes. Well, I was reading a book of his at the time, and it was on a house that he built in Palo Alto, and all the angles were 120 degrees. That was the sharpest corner. No right angles in it at all, and it was all in hexagon shapes to accommodate that. So he called it the Beehive House. And then he casually remarked at a certain point, he said that this is the best grid for human movement. Well, I was going to be designing houses for humans also, and so I tried to find out what did he mean by that. There was no explanation after, no explanation before, just that one little short sentence, and what did it mean? So that actually, the only way I was going to be able to find out was to be able to test it out myself. So any house that I got a commission for. I built it in the usual way with right angles. Then I changed the plan altogether and opened up the corners and made it 120 degrees to see what the difference was and try to understand how it could work. The floor areas were the same, had to be the same. But then I thought to myself, well, that's fine, but I don't want, why take 120 degrees? Why take his word for it? Why not try some other angles? So I got busy in my little drafting machine and I tried several other angles, more than 120, less than 120, and compared. So for every design I got, I had 4 designs, and I tried to compare them and see what was good about it in one angle and what was better about it for that site in another angle.
So we'll see when we get into the house pictures, you'll begin to see in how Shumiatcher, how a house planned on 120 degrees looks.
Sorry.
When we show the pictures of the house in a few minutes, you'll begin to see how the grid actually impacts the space.
Oh, yes.
So after working as a house designer and builder for several years in Calgary, you decided to go back to architecture school. So you had already built quite a few houses, and so it was a mature student coming back to school, the kind that we appreciate very much. And you and Barbara and your son Cal set out on a journey around North America to visit schools of architecture and as many Frank Lloyd Wright buildings as you could.
Yes.
So can you just tell us maybe about a couple of the Frank Lloyd Wright, maybe one of the Frank Lloyd Wright buildings that impressed you the most?
Oh, yes. Well, I knew I'd seen all kinds of pictures of his buildings, and the most important ones were always photographed a great deal. Fallingwater, though, was a very special case. It just looked like an outcropping out of the rock, out of a ravine side, with a stream going into it and a waterfall going out afterwards. It was amazing, really an impressive looking thing. And I had my camera with me, and I had it all loaded with film and ready to take a bunch of pictures inside as well as outside. But once I got in there, I didn't have Michael Perlmutter with me, and I'm afraid I looked at around the spaces and saw and drank it all in, and I decided, look, I can't take any pictures of this. There are all kinds of important photographers that have tried to do it, and none of them made it as far as I was concerned. Nothing was like being in the house itself. And so I put away my camera and enjoyed my stay in Fallingwater almost the whole day. As I said before, Frank Lloyd Wright was not popular then. There was only one other couple that came during that whole day. Otherwise, Barbara and I were alone in the house. And it was really a truly amazing thing.
That's a rare treat to be alone in a building like that. So you made this big journey around the United States and Canada, looking at Frank Lloyd Wright houses, and also looking at several schools. And after applying and being accepted to a number of different schools, you decided to go to our competitor, the University of Toronto. But I was very happy to hear your story that you left Toronto after less than 1 year. So that made me happy as the director of the school here at UBC. And so could you just briefly tell us why you don't like the University of Toronto?
Well, first of all, they didn't really like me, and I sure as heck didn't like them either. So,
but
they always felt they were trying to steer me into doing something that they wanted me to do, not asking me what I wanted to do. So finally, about the middle of the year, we had a small project. It was a branch library so I did my drawings, and the design professor came around, and it was just layout drawings. And the design professor came around and he said, looked at it carefully, this is here, this is that. This looks very good, Judah, he said. And then he half turned away, and as he turned away, he said, just put in the posts and draw it up. And I said, there are no posts. Oh, that made him stop in his tracks. He said, what? No posts? We don't want you to invent some kind of structural thing you're doing here. We want you to do an ordinary building like this, and this will be posts. Has to be a post and beam in there, and that's it. That's what he wanted. So finally,
you left.
I decided, well, that's a little too much. You know, I'm not going to learn anything here by them telling me what to do. So
before he finished his first year, which I think was rather bold, he just bolted.
Yeah.
And then decided to enroll at our school. So you had a very, very different experience at UBC under the directorship of Henry Elder.
Yes.
Could you say lots of good things about UBC tonight?
Well, Henry Elder was a marvelous person. He met with me, and we walked around the building, and we walked around the outside, and we did this for a little better than half a day, talking about everything, meeting different students. He introduced me to this one and that one. It was his gathering, and it was a very pleasant time. At the end of that time, he just simply took out his hand. We shook hands, and he says, we'll see you at the beginning of the term. No, I didn't have to present any credentials or anything like that. I was just accepted into the school. It was, and then, of course, I came, and in my first year design, we had 3 marvelous design instructors, Arthur Erickson, Bud Wood, and Barry Downs.
Ta-da!
So that was one thing already, and they were a marvelous trio. And if I've invented a structure for them, it wouldn't just be. They would be interested. They wanted to know how is this going to work, and so just like for instance, here's a sample of a structure that I was playing around with. I built crystals out of it, and there it is, and that met with a lot of interest and discussion and so on, and that was they certainly didn't tell me they didn't want to see me build that. Yeah. So I was free to build anything, and they were free to question me in any way they wanted to.
So UBC is open to the development of young minds, whereas University of Toronto is not. Thank you for the plug, Judah. So last question before we move into the house. After you graduated from UBC, you worked for several years in various offices before you started your own practice. And while Wright continued to be an important influence, could you just mention 1 or 2 other architects that have inspired you in your work?
Sorry.
Can you mention another architect or 2 that you have been inspired by in your work?
Oh, yes.
Besides Wright.
Well, when I was in I was in Spain one time, and I went to Merida to see the Roman ruins there. There was an amphitheater that was almost perfect preservation, and then when also I found out that the architect Raphael Moneo had just built us a museum over the digs that they were excavating, and had all kinds of Roman relics in it. So that museum really was going to house the relics that now he was building right over. So I said, well, I'll take a look at that. And on the outside, the building was pretty plain, like an ordinary brick building. But when you moved inside, it was a different story. There you could see that there was a Roman arch that was reinvented. Not a real Roman arch, but echoes of it and beautiful proportions. And the colonnades were marvelous. And then you would then see a wall that there was maybe only one piece of sculpture on that wall. It made you focus completely. The building never overpowered the display, and the display never made you forget about the building as you walked through it. It was a great experience. We spent another couple of days in that building because it was really, really worth something. So Moneo was one of the main, then across, but then there are so many architects that have a different point of view. Across the water back in Mexico, there was Louis Barragan. Now, Louis Barragan inside, any photographs I had seen, I never visited him, but the photographs of the insides that I had seen were nothing to look at. But outside the house, the grounds had beautiful freestanding colored walls with overhead spouts of water going into pools below. It was really just a completely magical, different world altogether. And that showed me it's not that I was inspired to the point, oh, I want to do that, or anything like that. But you're inspired by the fact that there's so many architects that could come up with such great ideas that, you can, it's a learning experience.
Yeah, great, Judith, thank you. So shall we go inside the house now?
Oh, sure, why not?
Get some views here. So when you first bought the lot near First and Tolmie, there was an old house on the site, and after living there for 7 years, you decided to design and build this new house, House Shumiatcher. Can you talk about what it was like for you to serve as the architect, the client, the general contractor, and in many parts of the house, the builder for this house as well?
Yes. Well, it was a super family project. Of course, my sons were already teenagers, so they came home from school every day at 4 o'clock and helped. They did all kinds of things. I remember the time when Cal and I put in this fella here.
He said,
we put in the windows in the house, and it was very windy weather. And I told Cal, look, if the wind catches the window before we nail it in, just drop it. Don't try to fight it. We can always replace the window, but we can't replace him.
Good advice.
Anyway, so it was really good, and of course, then, and I got a chance to build certain kinds of things that I had in mind for the built-in furniture was all built out of 2x2s. The built-in furniture at tables, I had a very tight little circle called the sea room, and you could, because I was looking out over the ocean. So
You wore many hats,
So,
and as the son of a hat maker,
sorry.
you wore many hats.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly did that.
So you did, I know that you built the fireplaces and the handrails and many of the details in the house that made the house very exquisite. And we'll head inside the house in just a minute, so you'll
Right.
see some of those in
Right, you are.
some of the images. The site that you were trying to build on, this house on, had a very challenging, steep north and east facing slope, but also had magnificent panoramic views. So can you talk about your approach to positioning the house on the site and how you organized the house in plan and section? It was a double lot,
Yes,
which sounds great, but also very, very steep and
yes,
challenging.
that's true. Well, first of all, there was a roadway, there was a boulevard, there was a sidewalk, and then our property. Now, and it was sloping very sharply. So we had a boulevard, and the boulevards were all grass, all the neighbors. And I wondered how many are going to have electric lawnmowers to do that sort of thing. And when Barbara heard that I was thinking of doing the same thing, she said, "Oh, horrors! No electric lawnmowers here. No, we'll plant the boulevard. We'll put in perennials, and we'll have bushes, and that's something that we can look at all the time." And what happened is that the greenery from the boulevard married up with the trees on the site, and they formed an arbor over the sidewalk. And we had to make sure that we trimmed the arbor so that it would be easy to walk through. Well, soon, one by one, the neighbors looked at it, and they did the same thing. And until finally we had a tunnel of greenery to walk at least halfway down the block. It's a beautiful thing. I hope they haven't destroyed any of it now. I was afraid to drive by.
It's such a lovely experience when you walk down that sidewalk rather than encountering the kind of ubiquitous hedges that are in so much of the area. Instead, you're actually on their property, or you feel as if.
We have a picture right up there. There's the sidewalk.
Yeah. It's quite magical.
City sidewalk, and there's the boughs going over.
Okay.
And of course, did you ask me something else too? I don't know.
I'm about to.
Uh-huh.
I'm about to.
Okay.
So we talked earlier about, Judah was telling earlier about his fascination with these grids that will eliminate 90-degree corners. And this is the entryway to the house. And you begin to be able to see this sort of the effect of this 120-degree grid, nothing square. Can you talk about the kind of spatial impact of this more open grid on the inside of the house?
Well, if you have this 120 degrees or these hexagon shapes inside the house with no square corners, you could see in 6 different directions, because that's the number of walls you have around you, or no walls, if you choose. That was one of the main things. And then Barbara had said she wanted to have as close as possible to a one-room house. One on the main floor. And a one-room house, by that she meant you could then glimpse but the room next door would not be closed off. You could see part of it. You could see up to part of the ceiling and see a part of the floor upstairs too. And so, and you could move nicely around the floor plan in different directions. And you know, that's when I finally decided, yeah, Lloyd Wright was right. 120 degrees is the most comfortable corner to turn, and it was really that's how the whole layout was made.
What I really love is that the house has this free flow of space, but also you created these very lovely spaces of stasis within that. So it felt always to me like there was a kind of river that's flowing over the river of space, flowing over these boulders, let's say, that are these places of stasis, like the sea room Judah described earlier, which he helped to build, or he built.
I built it all.
On there, or in the dining room there in the distance, you can see. So, and there you can also see the beautiful handrail that you made yourself as well.
Yeah, that's the hand railing upstairs. That was fun. I had these, as I say, I used 2x2s, kiln dried 2x2s. I cut out all the pieces separately to begin with, and then I just built them and hammered and glued them together until they were up. I did all the railings in 1 week because I had pre-cut everything. I knew what I wanted. That was a good design.
So, the sad part of this story is that how Shumiatcher was demolished 1 year after it was sold. And with these kind of rapidly escalating land values that we're all painfully aware of, this has become an ever more frequent occurrence. So some people think this is really tragic, that we're losing our architectural heritage, and others feel this is just kind of the normal course of events in any city. What do you think, Judah?
Well, both. I think that, for instance, if you go to France, you want to take a trip down the Loire Valley to visit the cathedrals. That's their heritage from kings in the past. They have built great structures, and it's still today. Anyone who goes to France almost goes down the Loire Valley to see that. Well, that's not our heritage. Ours is, we don't have very many monumental buildings on the way from here to Whistler, for instance. So, but we do have individual houses, and some of them are very beautiful, and those we have are our treasures. And these treasures reflect the importance of the individual. And sometimes that fact is overlooked. We want to thank right now Joe Way for thinking of a project that reminds us of our heritage. And thanks to SALA and to you, Leslie, for undertaking that project.
Yeah, thank you.
and your series on domestic architecture in Vancouver will shine light on these various jewels that we do have that are our treasures, and we'll only treasure them more. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Judah.